One day before the wedding, she turned off her phone and disappeared. Said she needed space. At 3:12 a.m., I got a notification. Her card was used at a resort 2 cities over. I called the hotel, asked for room 408. A man answered. The next morning, she came home to a locked door and an empty venue. The rehearsal dinner had ended with champagne toasts and nervous laughter that echoed through the private dining room of the restaurant we had chosen for its intimate atmosphere. Rebecca sat beside me at the head table, but something felt fundamentally wrong about her presence that evening. Her smile seemed forced and brittle, her responses to well-wishers mechanical and distant, as if she were performing a role rather than living a moment. When my mother approached with last-minute seating arrangements for tomorrow's ceremony, Rebecca excused herself to the restroom and simply disappeared. I found her outside the restaurant 20 minutes later, smoking despite having quit 2 years earlier when we first started talking about marriage. The autumn wind whipped through her carefully styled hair, undoing hours of preparation for tomorrow's photographs. She looked at me with eyes that held secrets I couldn't decipher, then dropped the cigarette and crushed it under her heel with unnecessary force. I need to go home and get some sleep, she said without meeting my gaze, her voice carrying a strange detachment. Tomorrow is going to be overwhelming, and I need to be ready for everything. The drive to her apartment was suffocatingly silent except for love songs on the radio that now felt mocking and inappropriate. She kissed me goodnight at her door, but it felt like goodbye rather than the excited farewell of a couple about to be married. When I tried to follow her inside for what I assumed would be our last evening as an unmarried couple, she placed her hand firmly on my chest and shook her head. Bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, she whispered, but her voice carried no playfulness or romantic superstition, only a desperate need for distance. I returned to my apartment and tried to sleep, but my mind raced with wedding day logistics and a growing unease I couldn't name or dismiss. At 11:30, I called to wish her sweet dreams and tell her how excited I was for tomorrow. Her phone went straight to voicemail. At midnight, I tried again with the same result, my anxiety beginning to transform into something approaching panic. By 1 in the morning, genuine fear crept into my chest. The text came at 1:47. Need space to think. Phone will be off. See you at the altar. I stared at the message until the words blurred together, reading it over and over as if repetition might change its meaning. 24 hours before we were supposed to promise each other forever, she needed space to think about what exactly. I called her mother, who seemed confused but not alarmed. I called her sister, who sounded almost relieved. I called her best friend, who said she wasn't surprised and hung up before I could ask what she meant. The night stretched endlessly ahead of me. I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and watching the clock move toward dawn with agonizing slowness. Each minute felt like an hour of torture. The wedding was supposed to begin at 4 in the afternoon. The venue was booked and decorated. 300 guests were planning to attend. The minister was prepared. The photographer was scheduled. And my bride had vanished into the night with nothing but a cryptic message about needing space. I tried to rationalize her behavior in ways that didn't terrify me. Wedding nerves affected everyone differently. Some people needed solitude before major life changes. Some people processed stress by withdrawing rather than seeking comfort. But something deeper troubled me about the way she had looked at me outside the restaurant, the way she had avoided my eyes during dinner, the way everyone in her family seemed unsurprised by her disappearance. It was as if they had been expecting this moment, preparing for it, even while I remained completely oblivious to whatever was happening beneath the surface of our relationship. At 3:12 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a notification I had completely forgotten existed in my state of panic and sleeplessness. 2 months earlier, Rebecca had added me to her credit card account specifically for wedding expenses, allowing me to track purchases and manage our shared budget. The alert showed a transaction at the Riverside Grand Resort, 120 miles away in the neighboring city, processed just 2 hours earlier. My hands shook violently as I pulled up the hotel's website on my laptop, my coffee growing cold as the terrible implications became clear. The Riverside Grand was an upscale luxury resort known specifically for romantic getaways and weekend escapes, the kind of place couples went to rekindle their passion or celebrate anniversaries. The transaction amount was for a 2-night stay in their premium suite level, complete with champagne service and spa access. The pieces began forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Rebecca hadn't gone home to think about our wedding or process her nerves in solitude. She had driven 2 hours through the night to an expensive romantic resort and booked a premium suite for 2 nights. The night before our wedding, she was at a destination designed for intimate couples, and the evidence suggested she hadn't made this journey alone. I called the hotel's 24-hour front desk, my heart hammering so hard I could barely hear my own voice. The night clerk answered with professional courtesy, clearly accustomed to handling calls from concerned partners or family members. I explained that I was trying to reach my fiancée who had checked in earlier that evening, providing Rebecca's full name and approximate check-in time. After a brief hold that felt like an eternity, she confirmed that a guest matching Rebecca's name was indeed registered in their system. "Could you please connect me to room 408? The phone rang 3 times before a deep male voice answered with a sleepy, confused hello. Not Rebecca's voice. Not even close. A man's voice, thick with sleep and completely unfamiliar to me, answering the phone in my fiancé's hotel room at 3 in the morning. "I'm looking for Rebecca," I managed to say through a throat that felt like sandpaper. "She's in the shower," the man replied without hesitation or embarrassment, as if my call was expected and completely normal. As if he had every right to be answering her phone in her hotel room in the middle of the night. "Can I take a message for her?" The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my kitchen staring at the phone while my entire world collapsed around me. The woman I was supposed to marry in 13 hours was in a hotel room with another man, and he had answered her phone like they were intimate partners sharing space, sharing a bed, sharing everything that should have been mine. I tried calling back immediately, but the hotel wouldn't put me through again without Rebecca's explicit permission, which she clearly wasn't going to provide. I tried her cell phone knowing it was futile since she had already told me it would be turned off. I tried the hotel room directly, but nobody answered my repeated calls. The rest of the night passed in a nightmarish blur of rage, disbelief, and the gradual, horrifying acceptance that my wedding day would not proceed as planned. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible when I thought about infidelity in abstract terms. This wasn't just about physical unfaithfulness, but about the calculated, premeditated nature of what she had done. She had planned this betrayal. She had researched hotels, made reservations, packed bags, and driven 2 hours to meet another man. She had chosen to spend the night before our wedding destroying our relationship in the cruelest, most deliberate way possible. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a last-minute panic attack about commitment. This was a conscious choice to obliterate everything we had built together, and she had made that choice while I sat at home worrying about seating arrangements and wondering if she was getting enough sleep before our big day. By dawn, I had made my decision with crystalline clarity. If Rebecca wanted to throw away our relationship for a night with whoever had answered her phone, she would face the full consequences of that choice without any possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. Dawn broke gray and threatening, perfectly matching the storm of emotions churning inside me as I faced the reality of what needed to be done. I hadn't slept a single minute, hadn't eaten anything since dinner the previous evening, hadn't done anything except pace my apartment like a caged animal while processing the magnitude of Rebecca's betrayal. At 7:30 in the morning, exactly 8.5 hours before our scheduled ceremony, I made the first call that would change everything. I called the locksmith and explained that I needed every lock in my apartment changed immediately, willing to pay emergency rates for same-day service. The locksmith, accustomed to domestic situations that required immediate security changes, arrived within an hour and worked with professional efficiency. By 9 in the morning, every lock on our shared apartment had been changed completely. Rebecca's belongings remained exactly where she had left them, untouched and undisturbed, but her access to the space we had shared for 2 years was permanently revoked. I packed her engagement ring carefully in its original Tiffany box and placed it prominently on the kitchen counter where she would see it immediately upon any attempted entry, a symbolic gesture that would communicate everything without requiring words. Then I called the wedding venue and requested to speak with the event coordinator immediately, knowing that what I was about to do violated every contract clause and social convention imaginable. The conversation with Patricia, our event coordinator, was surreal in its clinical precision. Canceling a wedding 6 hours before the ceremony was unprecedented in her 15-year career, but I explained the situation with the detached efficiency of someone who had moved beyond emotion into pure survival mode. Patricia listened without judgment and surprised me with her immediate understanding and practical response. "I'll contact all the vendors immediately," she said without hesitation. "The catering can be donated to the downtown homeless shelter. The flowers can go to the children's hospital. The band has a force majeure cancellation clause that covers circumstances beyond reasonable control. You'll lose some deposits, but we can recover most of the major expenses." I called my parents next, waking them from sleep to deliver news that would shock them more than anything I had ever told them. Then I called my best man, who lived 3 states away and had flown in specifically for the wedding. Then I started working methodically through the guest list, making call after call with mechanical precision while my world crumbled around me. Each conversation was more difficult than the last, but I delivered the news with robotic consistency. The wedding was canceled due to circumstances beyond my control. No, I couldn't provide specific details. Yes, I was absolutely certain it was the right decision. No, there was no possibility of postponement or reconciliation. Rebecca's family proved harder to reach and harder to convince. Her mother cried hysterically when I told her, begging me to reconsider and work things out. Her sister demanded detailed explanations I refused to provide, threatening to call Rebecca herself to get the real story. Her father, a man who had welcomed me into their family 2 years earlier and treated me like the son he never had, simply said he was sorry for whatever had happened and hung up the phone. The most heartbreaking calls were to out-of-town guests who had already made significant sacrifices to attend our wedding. My college friends who had flown in from different states and taken vacation days from work. Rebecca's relatives who had driven hours or booked hotel rooms. Elderly family members who rarely traveled but had made exceptions for our special day. Each conversation required me to deliver devastating news while maintaining a composure I didn't actually feel. My cousin called back 20 minutes after I broke the news, asking if I needed company or support. My college roommate offered to catch the next flight to help me deal with whatever crisis had emerged. Rebecca's grandmother, 87 years old and sharper than most people half her age, asked if Rebecca was safe, and then said she wasn't surprised this had happened. By 11 in the morning, the wedding that had taken 8 months to plan, coordinate, and anticipate was completely dismantled. 300 guests were being systematically notified. Vendors were scrambling to adjust their schedules and minimize financial losses. The venue stood empty except for staff members removing decorations that would never be seen by wedding guests. The financial implications were staggering in their scope, but I discovered that I didn't care about money when weighed against the alternative of marrying someone capable of such calculated betrayal. The deposits we would lose, the contracts we would breach, the money that would simply disappear into the ether of canceled plans. None of it mattered compared to the disaster I was preventing by calling everything off. My best man arrived at my apartment at noon, having caught the earliest available flight after our phone conversation. He had suspected something was seriously wrong when I called that morning, but the full scope of Rebecca's deception and the systematic destruction of our wedding day shocked even him. Together, we made the final calls to vendors and confirmed that every aspect of the cancellation was complete and irreversible. Rebecca came home at 2:30 in the afternoon, still wearing the same black dress from the rehearsal dinner that now looked wrinkled and inappropriate in the harsh daylight. Her hair was disheveled beyond any reasonable explanation, her makeup smudged in ways that told stories I didn't want to imagine, and she carried herself with the unmistakable guilty posture of someone who had been caught in an unforgivable act and knew it. She tried her key in the front door lock 3 times, each attempt more frantic than the last, before the reality of the situation finally penetrated her consciousness. I watched her from the living room window as she knocked tentatively on the door that had been hers for 2 years, her movements uncertain and fearful. When I opened it, while keeping the chain lock firmly engaged, her face immediately crumbled with understanding and the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in weeks. "The wedding is canceled," I said through the narrow opening, my voice steady despite the chaos inside my chest. "Your engagement ring is on the kitchen counter. Your personal belongings will be packed and ready for pickup tomorrow afternoon." She tried to explain herself, tried to push past the door with desperate physical force, tried to convince me that what I had discovered wasn't what it seemed or could somehow be explained away. But her words fell on ears that had already heard too much truth in a stranger's sleepy voice, answering her phone at 3 in the morning while she was supposedly taking a shower. "Who is he?" I asked, the question hanging between us like a blade waiting to fall. The simple question seemed to deflate her completely. Rebecca's shoulders sagged with defeat, and she finally spoke the words that ended our engagement permanently and revealed the true scope of her betrayal. "Tyler, my college boyfriend from senior year. He called me 3 weeks ago saying he missed me and wanted to see me again. Last night after the rehearsal dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about whether we were making a mistake by getting married, whether I was settling for something safe instead of something passionate, whether there was something better out there that I would regret not exploring." The brutal honesty was infinitely worse than any lie she could have constructed. She hadn't been swept away by unexpected passion or overcome by temporary wedding-related insanity. She had deliberately chosen to betray our relationship on the eve of our wedding because she wondered if she could find something better than what we had built together over 3 years. 3 weeks, I repeated, letting the timeline sink in fully. "You've been planning this betrayal for 3 weeks while I planned our wedding." She nodded miserably, tears streaming down her face in a way that might have moved me 24 hours earlier, but now seemed like manipulation. I kept thinking I would call it off, that I would tell him no and focus on our future together. But last night, after seeing everyone at the rehearsal dinner and thinking about tomorrow, I just couldn't go through with the wedding without knowing whether I was making the right choice. So you decided to find out the night before our wedding by sleeping with another man. I thought I could have both somehow. I thought I could see him one last time, get him out of my system completely, and then marry you tomorrow and never think about him again. I thought I could compartmentalize it and move forward with our life together. The calculation behind her betrayal was breathtaking in its selfishness and stupidity. She had wanted to keep me as a safe, reliable backup plan while exploring whether her ex-boyfriend offered something more exciting or fulfilling. She had been willing to destroy our relationship, our wedding, our shared future, and the trust of everyone who loved us for the chance to see if the grass was greener in a hotel room 2 hours away. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt with finality. Through the wood, I could hear her crying, pleading, promising that she would make everything right and spend the rest of her life making up for this mistake. But some betrayals create emotional fractures too deep for any amount of time or effort to repair. Some choices reveal fundamental character flaws that cannot be unseen, forgiven, or overcome through apologies or promises. She stayed outside the door for nearly an hour, alternating between tears and increasingly desperate pleas for forgiveness. I watched from the window as she eventually walked to her car and sat there for another 30 minutes, probably calling Tyler to tell him that her backup plan had fallen through. Eventually, she drove away from our shared life forever, and I never saw her again except in the occasional nightmare or unwelcome memory. The silence that followed her departure was profound and strange. For the first time in 24 hours, I was completely alone with the wreckage of everything I had believed about my future. The apartment felt simultaneously too large and too small, filled with reminders of a relationship that had been built on foundations far less solid than I had ever imagined. The canceled wedding became legendary among our social circle and extended family, though I never provided the complete details of what had actually transpired during those 24 hours. Most people assumed we had simply realized we weren't compatible at the last minute, which was true in a way that cut far deeper than they could possibly imagine or understand. The financial cost of the cancellation was significant, but ultimately manageable, especially when weighed against the alternative of binding myself legally to someone capable of such calculated deception. We lost several substantial deposits that couldn't be recovered under any circumstances, but many vendors proved surprisingly understanding when they learned about the general nature of what had happened. The photographer, a kind woman who had shot dozens of weddings over her career, refused to accept any payment whatsoever and wished me luck in finding someone worthy of genuine commitment. The florist donated all the arrangements to local hospitals rather than letting them wilt unused. The caterer provided the prepared food to a downtown homeless shelter, ensuring that our canceled celebration at least fed people who needed it. Rebecca's personal belongings were collected by her sister 3 days after the confrontation, loaded into boxes that I had packed with meticulous care to avoid any future contact or conflict. The engagement ring was never retrieved despite multiple messages from her family, and it remains in my desk drawer to this day, an expensive reminder of how thoroughly someone can hide their true character until the moment when that character matters most. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I learned through mutual friends that Rebecca and Tyler had lasted exactly 3 weeks from the day she moved back to her hometown. The grass hadn't been greener on the other side of her betrayal, but by then the knowledge brought no satisfaction or vindication. She had destroyed our relationship and humiliated herself publicly for a fantasy that evaporated the moment it became her reality rather than her escape. The guests who had traveled significant distances for our wedding were disappointed, but remarkably understanding when they learned that serious problems had emerged at the last minute. Many decided to stay in town for the weekend anyway, turning what should have been a wedding celebration into an impromptu reunion of people who cared about me. Several attendees later said it was one of the most memorable weekends they had experienced in years, though obviously not for the reasons anyone had anticipated. I kept the apartment we had shared for another 6 months before accepting a job offer in a different city that wouldn't have been possible or appealing as a married man. The physical distance felt psychologically necessary, providing an opportunity to rebuild my life without constant reminders of what had been lost and what had been revealed about someone I thought I knew completely. Rebecca moved back to her childhood hometown and took a position at her father's insurance agency, according to the occasional updates I received through mutual acquaintances. She reportedly struggled with severe depression for several months after the canceled wedding. Though whether her depression stemmed from losing me or from the realization that she had destroyed something real and valuable for something imaginary and temporary, I never learned and never particularly cared to discover. 3 years have passed since that night, when a stranger answered my fiancé's phone and inadvertently saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. The betrayal was devastating and humiliating at the time, but it revealed Rebecca's true character precisely when that revelation mattered most for my future happiness and security. Her disappearance the night before our wedding, while crushing in the immediate aftermath, ultimately saved me from years of marriage to someone capable of such calculating deception and selfish decision-making. The experience taught me that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually elaborate forms of protection from futures we cannot imagine and partnerships we were never meant to endure. Rebecca's betrayal, while emotionally destructive in the short term, freed me from a relationship built on foundations far less solid than I had believed and opened possibilities I never would have pursued as a married man tied to someone fundamentally incompatible with genuine commitment. The night before what should have been forever became the night that set me free from someone who viewed our relationship as a backup plan rather than a life commitment worth protecting. In destroying our wedding, she revealed that she had never truly been committed to our marriage or to the kind of partnership that sustains itself through challenges and choices. Looking back now, I can see that her behavior during the weeks leading up to the wedding had been full of warning signs I was too excited and optimistic to recognize. The distance, the distraction, the lack of enthusiasm for details that should have excited a bride-to-be. Her family's lack of surprise at her disappearance suggests they knew something about her state of mind that she had never shared with me. The experience fundamentally changed how I approach relationships and evaluate the character of potential partners. I learned to pay attention to actions rather than words, to notice inconsistencies between stated values and actual behavior, and to recognize that some people are simply not capable of the kind of commitment that marriage requires. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal, while painful beyond description, can be a gift disguised as destruction when it prevents us from making irreversible mistakes with people who don't deserve our trust or devotion. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.